One of the first, and usually simplest, duties of Congress is to choose a speaker. Often this is almost a foregone conclusion, with the vote being little more than a formality. But a group of ultra-conservative Republicans have recently brought the process to a standstill. After 6 votes, not only has Representative McCarthy failed to win a majority, but the number of opposition votes has only grown. In a closely divided Congress, Mr. McCarthy cannot afford for any more than 4 Republican members to vote against him. In the third vote, the last vote Tuesday before the House adjourned, a full 20 Republicans voted against him, instead nominating Representative Jim Jordan. Mr. Jordan did not ask for this and actually made a speech pleading with his fellow representatives to vote for McCarthy instead, yet it was seemingly in vain. Wednesday, the House went through a further 3 votes, and the opposition to McCarthy only strengthened, with yet another member changing their vote, this time from in favor to McCarthy to present. Until a new speaker is elected, Cheryl Lynn Johnson, the clerk of the House, appointed by the previous speaker, Nancy Pelosi, will preside. But until a speaker is elected, the House is unable to do anything else. In fact, new members aren't even able to be sworn in until the new speaker is elected, although they do get a vote in the process. Some legal experts have even gone so far as to contest that currently the House of Representatives does not exist. The cause of this does not necessarily seem to be any particular feelings on who should be the speaker, but rather a negotiating tactic to force a change in the way the House will conduct business for the next 2 years. With a new budget needed this year and the debt ceiling approaching, these Republicans want McCarthy to take a harsher stance against the Democrat-controlled Senate and President Biden. They have also pushed for various investigations, use of spending bills to defund various agencies, and the ability to call for a snap vote for a new speaker at any time. Failure to elect a speaker, however, is not a new phenomenon, though it is rare. The last time a speaker was not elected on the first ballot was a century ago in 1923, when it took 9 votes to come to a consensus. Before that, you have to go back all the way to 1859. In total, there have been 15 such votes, including the current one. The longest took 133 ballots to get a majority. So while we wait for Congress to figure out how to do their jobs, let's look at some past votes and see how they compare. The first few speaker elections of the new republic were relatively uncontested. The first speaker won nearly 3/4 of the vote. This one, on the other hand, required 3 ballots. However, by the time of the Third Congress in 1793, the nation was seeing the beginning of factions, or as we call them today, political parties. Today we refer to these fledgling parties as the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. However, this is not entirely accurate. The Federalists certainly were one force, though they were not necessarily a formally organized political party yet, especially as we know them today. They were a much looser group. However, the Democratic Republicans did not yet even exist. It was their forerunners, referred to by historians as the Anti-Administration Party. They were an incredibly loose, informal coalition, somewhat growing out of the Anti-Federalist movement, though many of their prominent members did support the ratification of the Constitution. Essentially, they had a very fluid membership. Basically, their main policy was that they didn't like what Hamilton, that guy from the musical, was doing. What makes this vote important, though, is that it was the first partisan vote for House Speaker, starting a long and noble tradition of bickering. The next contested speaker election was in 1799, requiring only 2 ballots. So far as I can tell, the disputes seem to be largely internal, speaking to the fact that the parties weren't entirely united at this time and wouldn't be for decades after. However, the House record of the vote gives little information, as voting was conducted by secret ballot, something that was a contributing factor to many of these earlier votes splintering among several candidates, sometimes as many as 7 or 8. The Speaker election of 1805 was interesting in that the challenge came not from the opposite party, but extensive internal divisions. Democratic-Republican votes, despite making up the vast majority of the House, were split between four candidates. Eventually, Representative Macron was re-elected as Speaker of the House after 3 ballots. However, he faced serious opposition. He had previously broken with Jefferson, joining the growing Quid or Old Republican movement, believing that Jefferson had strayed from Republicanism's original principles of a strict view of the Constitution and strong state sovereignty. He did not end up seeking a 4th term as Speaker. The 1809 election was led into a second ballot because of an interesting anomaly. Incumbent Speaker, Representative Varnum, received 60 votes. However, 2 ballots were returned blank. If these were to count, the threshold for a majority would be 61. If not, it would be 59. It is believed that these blank ballots were a form of protest vote, but we cannot be certain of the original intention. In any case, they moved into a second round of voting in which Representative Varnum won a clear majority. The 1820 vote was also a new occurrence caused by the mid-term resignation of Henry Clay. The rising tensions over the expansion of slavery led to a highly contested vote. While this did take place in the so-called Era of Good Feelings, a highly misleading title, brought on by the collapse of the Federalist Party in 1815, the name is inaccurate, to say the least. Just because there was, in theory, only one party doesn't mean that everybody liked each other. It took a full 22 ballots to elect a speaker. Once again, we have a change in the political landscape leading up to this vote. No longer do we have the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Instead, we have the Jacksonian Democrats and the National Republican Party. I really do have to make a video on the different party systems. The key thing, though, is not to correlate these with our modern Democrats and Republicans. They're not the same in any form, although these Democrats are technically the origin of the current Democratic Party, but they are not the same in any form. They share essentially no policies, organizational structure, anything. They are wildly different. Once more, this kerfuffle was brought on by the resignation of the previous speaker. Then President Jackson supported future President James K. Polk for the position, but he was rebuffed by the House, who saw him as meddling in their duties. This led to his party splintering among several candidates, settling on Representative John Bell after 10 votes. This showdown was between the Democrats, technically the same party as the present, but with vastly different policies, as I said before, and the Whigs, the succession to the National Republicans. As the balance was neck and neck between the two parties, and there was a long, drawn-out controversy over seating a few representatives from New Jersey, the vote dragged on for a long time, in the end taking 11 ballots. It is perhaps of interest to note as well that the voting wasn't entirely along party lines, as in different ballots both Democratic and Whig candidates had overall majorities if their vote totals were combined. It's important to remember when looking at this time period that often sectional divisions, North versus South, pro-slavery versus anti-slavery, played a larger role than technical political party. In the end, alas, the victor was Whig Representative Robert Mercer Taliaferro Hunter. This one really isn't anything special. The Whigs had a slim majority, a few were upset at first, and on the third ballot they voted for the main candidate. That's pretty much it. In 1849, another closely divided House went through 63 votes. This was due to a number of factors, such as, of course, internal divisions over slavery, and the emergence of the newly founded Free Soil Party, a party focused solely on their anti-slavery beliefs. After 59 votes, the House adopted a plurality rule, saying that if nobody got a majority, the next 3 votes, the speakership would just go to whoever had the most votes because they were fed up. This led to Democrat of Georgia, Representative Howard Cobb, becoming Speaker on the 63rd ballot, despite gaining only 46% of the vote. This vote far and away sets the record, stretching over 2 months and 133 ballots, eventually having to be ended by yet another plurality rule. Also, as in many previous votes, the vote was divided up both regionally and among various loose new parties that had formed after the collapse of the Whigs. The first was the Opposition Party, which was almost more of a label than a formal party, made up mainly of anti-slavery Northerners from both the Democratic and Whig parties. They were the forerunners of the Republican Party, but really had no formalized structure. The other were the so-called Native American Party, who, naturally, did not have a single Native American politician, also known as just the American Party, or more commonly, especially in modern-day parlance, the Know-Nothings. Their policy, essentially, was that they were very bigoted, hated foreigners, and were just generally not very nice. As you may imagine, a Congress made up of 82 Democrats, 51 Know-Nothings, and 100 oppositioners made for disagreements. Finally, though, Nathaniel Banks of the Know-Nothings was chosen. 1859 is the same old story of a tight Congress and divisions over slavery, now between the Republicans and Democrats. However, that wasn't all, because there was now a new opposition party, which was the complete opposite of the previous opposition party, made up of pro-slavery Southerners. 44 votes finally led to Republican William Pennington to be elected by a razor-thin majority. Then the last vote before the current one to go into multiple ballots, 1923, was actually somewhat similar to our current day situation. It saw the progressive wing of the Republican Party, which held the majority, vote against their leader and incumbent speaker, Frederick Chile. After 9 ballots, they finally came to his side after he offered a number of concessions, including seats on various committees to their leaders and a promise to reconsider certain House rules. And that leads us right up into the present. I hope these past examples help you to understand the current situation a little better and put it into its broader context. This video was a little rushed, of course, since I wanted to get it out while the events were still ongoing and current, but I did my best to be as accurate as possible. So, if you enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.